Indie games are consistently exceptional, unique masterpieces. Despite that, there are dozens of amazing games that I could highly recommend that almost nobody has played. And that's what I'm here for today, bringing you 10 great indie games you probably haven't heard of. So, without any further ado, let's start this off with Pseudo Regalia is a 3D platformer with an incredible sense of movement and flow. And on top of that, it is the rare 3D Metroidvania. The game isn't perfect by any means, and I will go over my biggest critiques in a moment. But what you do need to know is this is mid-game movement on a first playthrough. And it is so incredibly satisfying to weave moves together. And because of how great a sense of flow Pseudo Regalia has, every single move chains together perfectly and the platforming feels incredible. On top of that, the game gives you so much freedom, especially early on, where you are able to get to so many areas way before you should. And something you will see later in this video is I adore when a Metroidvania lets you go places ridiculously early. The satisfaction of seeing a jump you can't make and then thinking about it for a second and realizing there's a way around this without getting a new movement upgrade is really fun. And it's done with some really subtle things. The backflip is ever so slightly higher of a jump than the triple jump, which means you can get to places early. Combine that with how great the animation on Sybil is, and the game feels great to control. While the N64-esque art style isn't for everyone, I absolutely love how snappy the movement feels and looks. And ironically enough, despite me just praising that, the N64 art style is one of the biggest problems I have with Pseudo Regalia. And that's because this is a completely different area from a completely different point of the game. And if you're not watching the video and are just listening, the areas look incredibly similar. Basically every single area in this game and every single environment is very, very similar feeling. And that can make it hard to navigate a very open and large game when every single area looks almost the same with very few defining factors. But at the same time, the rest of the game is incredible, and genuinely, aside from that one tiny graphical issue and the combat feeling underutilized, everything else in the game is incredible. I would love to see more from this game. I want more Pseudo Regalia because it is incredible. And I really hope this game gets a sequel. And I highly recommend it to anyone who likes 3D platformers. And if you like Metroidvanias as well, it is an amazing game worth checking out. And continuing on with 3D platformers, we have Tinykin, which is effectively what if Pikmin met a 3D platformer. And in case you weren't already aware, I absolutely adore the Pikmin games. So any game that takes inspiration from it is something that instantly intrigues me the moment it gets on my radar. And the movement in this game is still really solid. Nothing close to Pseudo Regalia, but it's still quite fun to platform, and this game is more of a puzzle platformer, and I think that's great. I think it's really a unique take on the Pikmin formula, and while I wish it was closer to the Pikmin games that inspired it, it's still an incredibly competent Pikmin-like. In fact, out of the small handful of Pikmin-likes I have played, this actually handles the Pikmin AI the best out of all of them, aside from the mainline games. And like, all jokes aside, how are there only, I think, 3 Pikmin-like games, at least to my knowledge, because it's a series that gets games so unoften and has a large dedicated fan base. I'm honestly surprised we don't have more games inspired by them. Either way, back to Tinykin. It is genuinely a refreshing take on a 3D platformer collectathon because of the Pikmin mechanics. I also love the fact that your equivalent to Pikmin, the titular Tinykin, aren't game specific but level specific. You have to get a new group of them every single level instead of your save file having the amount you have, because that means the later levels you still have to spend a lot of time in because you don't just have all of the sources and resources you need to clear it the moment you get there. On top of that, the game is just really fun and I think controls really well, and the puzzles are generally enjoyable. It's on the easier side, but that's not a bad thing at all. If you don't mind it being a different take on the formula and you want more Pikmin, I highly recommend Tinykin. And if you want to try a Pikmin light game that's in a genre you're more comfortable with, if you haven't tried the series out, this is also a pretty solid choice. Genuinely, I highly recommend Tinykin for any and all Pikmin fans who are still looking for another game. Either way, let's move on to Neon White. Just like the previously mentioned Pseudo Regalia, Neon White is a platformer focused around incredible movement. Albeit, it's a first-person game, and a lot different, but its movement and flow is amazing nonetheless. This is a speedrunner's game. It is designed to be speedran. And even if you don't enjoy speedrunning, I feel like it's still really rewarding to get even just decent times on the levels and getting all of the at least gold or ace emblems. And it makes what I find one of the hardest parts of learning a run for speedrunning really easy, because the game automatically teaches you the routes. There's the default route that's the easiest, and then as you get better and better times, the game will give you hints showing you a second alternate route. And believe it or not, there's usually a third intended route that you might pick up on your own, and dozens of other things you could do using the tools the level provided you to get to the end even quicker. And on top of that, the game decided to be nice enough to have a quick restart button for levels. That's right, there's just a button you press to restart the level, and that's super nice, because it means if you make a mistake, you don't have to pause menu. You just hit the button, you're back at the start. And admittedly, the levels can be a bit confusing to learn initially, and are hard to sight read. But that is not an issue, because frankly, you're going to be playing the levels dozens of times, even if you just want to clear the game and play every level once. And that is because you're gonna probably die. You're probably gonna need to do it again. You're gonna need to learn the tech. And there is so much stuff in this game that is just there, and it's there so you can use it to do something that the game doesn't intend, and that is amazing. It doesn't necessarily mean it's there for a purpose, but it might be there so if you have some weird tool or know how to do a piece of tech, you can get to it, you can skip things. Every level has so many skips you could theoretically use. Neon White is a blast, and the levels are amazing, and it is just really fun and really satisfying to get a good time on the levels, which is just fun. Genuinely, if you do play the game, I recommend, even if you aren't interested in speedrunning or doing a lot of that, at the bare minimum, genuinely try to get some of those harder emblems. Maybe don't get the red developer emblems. Those are really hard. Also, really cool thing about those. On the Switch version, they actually have different times to account for a controller. Neon White is a fantastic game, and if you enjoy movement-based first-person shooters, or things that just have really awesome movement, I highly recommend this game. And if we want to talk about another fast-paced, fun, and highly replayable shooter, we have Crab Champions. And by highly replayable, I mean it's a roguelike / roguelite. Because it wouldn't be an indie game compilation video without at least one of these. And that isn't meant as a slight on the game or genre, it just happens to be there's a ton of amazing indie games that are roguelikes. In fact, the genre is almost entirely comprised of indie titles. But going back to Crab Champions, if the music in the background sounds familiar but you haven't played the game, that's probably because this game is made by the guy who made Crab Raid. Not kidding, he's a game developer now, and he made an incredibly good game with an amazing soundtrack and controls that are really fluid, and a really great upgrade system. Now, admittedly, before I get into anything else, this game is in early access and is still relatively frequently getting updates every couple of months. But that also means everything I say in this next section is subject to change. Now, without further ado, let's properly talk about Crab Champions. You didn't need to do the title drop again. Let's just get this out of the way. The movement in this game is technically kind of slippery and kind of floaty, but I think it really works because it's just really fun, and despite those things that I think would normally be an issue, the movement tools you have in this game honestly make it so it's really fun. Yes, it can be somewhat slippery and somewhat floaty, but you can just do whatever and it is fun. And just to continue with controls, the actual gunplay for a third-person shooter, it's solid. I'm not a shooter person by any means, but a lot of the guns have spray. There are a lot of the ones I really like using are just spray, rapid-fire things, just shoot in the general direction of the enemies. There's a good variety of what you have, and I think they control quite well, and the ones that don't, frankly, I can never use in any game with that style of weapon, so that's a skill issue. However, continuing on further, the weapons have a ton of variety because of the power-up system. After each wave / island, you get a chest that contains one of a handful of items. They can be upgrades to your defenses, your health, your movement, your weapon, your secondary, or your melee. And all of them are honestly quite useful. I think depending on your playstyle, you can use a lot of them. And the real cool part about it is it's not, I get a random upgrade, or I get a choice of random upgrades. You actually get to determine which ones you want based on the upcoming levels. You get a choice of which tool you want, and sometimes there's things like, oh, this level will have extra enemies. Do you want to do that? This is more challenging. This is a type of stage that's easier, but doesn't have the reward you necessarily want. And it adds that level of, what do I go for? I usually just pick what I want anyway, because, frankly, I can probably handle it. And I did just briefly mention the secondary and melee. The secondary, usually a type of grenade. I think they're really useful for crowd control. I really like the black hole grenade, because it just sucks everything in. So if you have spread weapons or any AoE tools, super fun. And same with the melee. As you can see in this footage, I have a hammer. It's a cool hammer. You jump in the air and slam down on things. I also like it because it can be used to gain height, which basically means I just use my melee as a mobility tool that also hurts enemies near me. Point being, the combat in this combat-focused game is really fun, and there is a decent amount of different types of stages. There's only a very small handful at the moment, but it adds the variety to spice things up between the standard gameplay. But it wouldn't be fair if I completely ignored my small handful of issues I have with the game. I don't care for how you unlock new weapons. Like, specifically the weapons, secondaries, and melees. You use a key, you get the next one. You can use one key per run. I have almost 200 keys I can't get through. I think it'd be fun if each weapon had the prior weapon have a little challenge or bonus thing you had to do to unlock them, but that's just me. Though I do really like how you unlock cosmetics and different skin options, since those are done through achievements. And, well, some of the achievements are just beat the game with this weapon. Others are unique challenges that make you play the game in a different way. And others are completely ridiculous and insanely brutal. But they're technically optional. My other issue being the lack of enemy and boss variety. Almost every single boss in the game, if not all of them, are just bigger version of enemy with higher health pool and less cooldown between attacks. And there's only a small handful of enemy variations. This isn't too big of an issue. It doesn't matter that much realistically, and will almost certainly be fixed in due time, as there have already, in the time I have been playing the game, probably doubled, if not more, the actual enemy count. And if this sounded at all interesting to you, I'd recommend at least keeping an eye on or giving Crab Champions a chance. Either way, let's move on to another great roguelike, Dead Estate. And I'm just going to be entirely honest right now. This is one of the games in this video, specifically out of the roguelikes, that I played to get footage for, and then went, I should play this more, and have started playing again. So that is obviously a very good sign. That I played it to get footage and then went, I want to continue playing this off camera because I forgot how fun this was, and there's a lot of content I still need to do that wasn't there when I last played. Either way, Dead Estate is an isometric roguelike / roguelite that admittedly has a bit of a learning curve, especially with both how the map is handled and also the angle that you played the game at definitely takes a bit to get used to. And genuinely, it's really fun. All the characters are similar but different, each having their own starting weapon that has infinite ammo. So, similar to Enter the Gungeon in that regard. And on top of that, every character has an alternate cosmetic that has its own little challenge to unlock. And I think that's really neat. And in addition, I think achievements are handled really well in this game, where there's mostly secret achievements, but once you get certain achievements in the achievement log, you can actually see the next achievement in line or the ones that are related to what you have. So character-specific achievements are going to be missing until you unlock that character, but how to unlock that character is in that list. It is a game with a ton, and I genuinely mean a ton, of secrets, and admittedly a bit of a tough learning curve, but if you can make it through all of that, you are in for a roguelike I really like. If you are a fan of top-down roguelikes or games like The Binding of Isaac, I highly recommend at least giving Dead Estate a try. And if you're a bit hesitant, the very first build of the game is available on Newgrounds for free. But before we continue, if you're enjoying the video and would like to support the channel, please consider liking and subscribing since it helps with the channel an absolute ton. I may not have a good transition, but 100% orange juice. And, I mean, you can kind of tell already just by looking at this, it is, in a certain vein, inspired by Mario Party. And also a deck builder. Because what indie game isn't a deck builder? But, genuinely, I really like 100% Orange Juice. It's a fun Mario Party-esque game with turn-based RPG elements. Your goal is to reach the max level, you roll a dice to move around the board, if you land on the same space as somebody or past them, you fight them. When you kill them, you can get half their stars, stuff like that. Lower their HP, they die, they lose even more stars and are sent back to their spawn and have to wait a certain number of turns. The unique part is the characters, because despite characters having very few differences other than their base stats and their ultimate, there's a lot of variety in that despite that, especially the ones with slightly unique or different passives. And genuinely, I think some of them are really fun, and there's probably someone to match your playstyle. There's probably close to 100 characters at this point, especially by the time this video comes out. No, seriously, there's a reason I haven't uploaded in months. I've been working on this. Well, that, and I honestly haven't really wanted to talk about video game stuff because of how miserable and depressing it's been in the space. But continuing with orange juice, my only major complaint is it takes a long while to get cards, and like, you're gonna be stuck with the starting deck for a while. And then also, like, almost every single character is paid DLC. And I mean, I get it. I do. The game is really cheap, the characters aren't that expensive, and there's new characters added to the game every couple of months. But I just am not the biggest fan of having DLC in games in general, especially when close to 90% of the roster is paid DLC. Cheap DLC, but still DLC. The other problem is just finding a lobby, because it's an online game that's been out for close to a decade, and I'm gonna be entirely honest, if you want to play a game, you are getting stuck with a random character in the middle of a match until that match ends, and you pray the people in the lobby want to play another match. And if they do, it'll probably be fun. But I can't hold that against the game. It's just a natural thing that's going to happen to any game with online servers that has been around for a long time, especially if that's a small indie game. Either way, let's continue to an indie game that got completely overshadowed. That being Iconoclasts, which is a really good Metroidvania. Though, if you're wondering what I mean by got completely overshadowed and underlooked, well, here's Iconoclast's release date, and here's Celeste's release date. Yeah, one of the most popular indie games to come out in recent memory released the literal next day. And don't get me wrong, Celeste is amazing, but it does suck that it really overshadowed another great game. And no one's at fault. It's not like the Celeste devs knew about Iconoclast and the Iconoclast devs didn't know about Celeste. And even if they did, I don't think either of them knew if their games were going to be massive successes, let alone something like Celeste that blew up incredibly quickly. Point being, I want to show some love for Iconoclasts, because it's really, really good and really solid. And given it does help, I love Metroidvanias, especially when they're done well. And this is both of those. A Metroidvania, and one that's done really well, that has a really solid story, and the puzzles in the game all feel really great to solve, and you have a perfectly sized toolkit. It doesn't feel like there's too little you can do, or there's too much, which means everything blends together really nicely to help solve puzzles. Top that off with combat that, while it isn't perfect, is really fun and enjoyable. And a world that loops back on itself in decently natural ways and is generally just really fun to explore. And genuinely, I think the stuff that sticks with me the most is the puzzles, but the combat, as I said, really solid. And frankly, the game as a whole is just really fun. It even has pretty solid platforming. Genuinely, Iconoclast, it's a bit on the smaller side, is really great and was super undershadowed. And I do mean smaller side. I got, I think, 70-80% of the collectibles in my casual playthrough, which really, really was not that many. I really wish there was more stuff in areas that incentivized you to go back to previous ones. That is one of my biggest complaints, and that is partially because I have been spoiled with Metroidvanias that have so much cool stuff in every nook and cranny. Think games like Hollow Knight. And this isn't me trying to crap on Iconoclasts or anything. I really like the game. I just wish there was more stuff. And frankly, I think that says something about a game that one of my biggest complaints is I wish there was more optional stuff. Because genuinely, I wish there were more optional puzzles, I wish there were more optional collectibles. There's a couple optional bosses, which are really cool. And I wish the party system, mechanic thing actually did stuff or mattered. Because I'm gonna be entirely honest, I forgot that was even a thing till looking at the footage. Because wow, it is so underutilized. Nevertheless, if you haven't played it and enjoy Metroidvanias or puzzle platformers, this is definitely a game worth keeping your eye out, especially since I've seen it go in bundles for dirt cheap. However, continuing on, we have a game that pleasantly surprised me and I had heard nothing of prior to playing. That being Last Command, which is a self-described snake bullet hell. No, I am not kidding. And at that, Last Command is honestly great! Like, surprisingly so. I had high hopes for it, because it is a bullet hell that looked really fun. And it blew me away. Last Command is one of those games that I don't think I will ever see a major company ever make anything like this, because it chose to use the fact it is an indie game and can do very unique things and took that to its advantage. Think games like Doki Doki Literature Club. How that messes with the actual files on your computer to make an interesting experience. You would never see that elsewhere. And I adore when games do things that can only be done in the medium of games. And not just the fact it's playable, but the fact is it can directly interact with other things. It knows if you're playing this for a second or third time. It knows these things, and it can. A movie and a TV show will never be able to directly know that for a fact. And that is something incredible about the medium. And this is a game that uses that advantage that the medium has. Now, admittedly, the game's story is pretty lackluster. It's not all that interesting or special until the final act, which is really cool. But the rest of that and everything that gets there, it's okay, it's serviceable, it's not actively bad. I didn't actively want to skip it, but I also wasn't super invested. But it very easily makes up for that with its really fun gameplay. The bullet patterns are great and feel very fair. Despite being a snake-based game, the movement is really free, and while you're technically stuck on a grid, there are ways you can move off of it. And it has a ton of mechanics that are thrown at you relatively quickly, but are pretty easy to understand and learn. Hell, the bullets are all color-coded depending on what they do. I'll be entirely honest, this game just plays like the bullet hell sections in Undertale and Deltarune. I love those games. This is basically just what if Undertale was just the bullet hell part. And the bullet hell parts are great. Just like in those games. Patterns are great. The game has a very, very simple color palette, which makes it so everything reads incredibly clearly. Almost everything is one of a small handful of colors, and each color has a different meaning. White you want to touch, red hurts you, purple you dash through, blue you don't want to move through, Very, very simple, and everything is communicated incredibly because of that. The point being, while the art style is admittedly simple, it is done so everything has an insane level of visual clarity, which makes it so, despite there being a ton of bullets, cause it's a bullet hell, everything is super clear and easy to read at all times. The game checkpoints you in the middle of boss fights, which normally I'm not the biggest fan of, but it really works in this game because you only have a limited number of lives per checkpoint. So, you know, you get there, maybe you have like 2 extra attempts. And at that, I find it can add a bit of extra strategy. Do I want to brute force it and go in to basically instantly die and use the checkpoint so I can learn the patterns of this new phase before I continue and eventually die and go back to the start? Because that is going to happen, and that's fine. The fights are relatively short if you know what you're doing and are all really fun. And if you don't want to use the checkpoints, you don't have to. It just makes it so there's an easier way to practice fights and learn them without having a dedicated practice mode, or give players a heal in the middle of some of the longer fights, allowing them to go on. And to top that all off, the way that you deal damage is by picking up items, and that forces you to weave through the enemy's bullet pattern instead of just standing in an area where it's safe or waiting for an opening. Because honestly, there really aren't many openings. You can usually get some attacks in safely, yes, but the majority of the time, you need to constantly be moving and constantly working on your way either around the current bullet or shooting. And on top of that, honestly, it's a gameplay balance that forces you to play aggressively, which is in and of itself great, and also very interesting because it also has the dynamic from Snake of you deal more damage the more pieces you have. But the more pieces you have, the larger your hitbox is. So that is a very interesting choice that you get to make. Do I want to go for higher damage or do I want to go for a smaller hitbox? Because both are equally valid. Personally, I prefer just giant hitbox and then just freaking machine gun the enemy down, but you can do whatever you want, and that's really cool. It is a great risk-reward system within the damage system. Genuinely, if you like the bullet hell systems in games like Undertale and want more, or are a fan of bullet hells in general, this is a game that's definitely worth at least keeping an eye out for, or looking at more on your own, because it has a lot going for it, and is really interesting. Moving on to another indie game that is absolutely incredible, we have Chrono Ark, which, if you've been watching the channel for a little bit, the name may ring a bell. And that is because this is my personal game of the year from 2024. And just to recap, here's a few clips from that video. Let's start this with the gameplay, which was the biggest turnoff for me, especially when I first played this game. Because it is very complicated, and I did not understand most of it. There's like 6 different card types, several, genuinely more than a dozen status effects. Each boss has their own completely unique gimmick. Top that off with nearly 20 characters who all play completely differently, and yeah, it's a lot to take in, especially on your first couple dozen runs, honestly. But once you find a character you really like using, and then use that character to learn the enemy's patterns and their mechanics, it's a really great learning curve where eventually you'll be bringing along characters that you don't really like using, but you want to learn. And maybe even find characters that you adore that you never thought you'd end up playing. And I still stand by that. Chrono Ark is a game that has incredible gameplay and an amazing story. Genuinely, its story blew me away. And, well, it may not have the best presentation in a lot of aspects. It's really amazing in what counts, and that's honestly why I love indie games. They may lack polish in certain areas, but they are fantastic, and when it comes to what really matters to me personally in a game, the gameplay, story, that sort of stuff, no one does it as well as indie games. And I'm saying this now because genuinely I adore Chrono Ark, but I don't want to say anything about this game because I don't want to spoil it. Its story is insane with so many amazing twists and turns. And I just covered the gameplay, and by I mean me, 6 months ago at the time of recording this. And if this game sounds interesting to you, and you do end up playing it, but get stumped by the gameplay, because again, there's a lot. It is complicated, and admittedly, not the best explained. There's 2 amazing videos by the content creator Alatarius, I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing your name wrong, which I will have linked in the description, just for those who want to try Chrono Ark. Though, maybe don't look at their actual channel, since one of their more recent videos, and it will likely stay this for a while because they do not upload frequently, is a guide on the true final boss. So, I'd avoid looking at that because their identity is a massive spoiler. If it weren't for the final game in this video, I could confidently say Chrono Ark is one of my favorite games that I could recommend in this video. The problem is, the last 2 are even better. Oh, and yes, I did just say 2, because here is the penultimate game of this video, Tevi. Tevi is an absolutely marvelous Metroidvania fused with a bullet hell, and just like Chrono Ark, right before it, this game was actually my game of the year for 2023, its release year. Now, would I still call it that since I've actually played Baldur's Gate since that video? Maybe, maybe not. Both of them are amazing, and I think deserve to be on the same tier of discussion when it comes to quality. And that, in and of itself, should say how highly I think of this game, considering Baldur's Gate was no question going to win Game of the Year. It did, it's amazing, and it deserves those accolades. And I think Tevi is just as deserving of similar praise. While it's a very different game, it is very, very high quality. As you can hear right now, the soundtrack is absolutely amazing, and the sprite work and artwork in this game is gorgeous. And the gameplay somehow manages to be even better. It's a fairly linear Metroidvania with great exploration in the areas you are able to, and the bosses are amazing. They are super fun, great bullet hell fights that I adore. Genuinely, I love this game. It was my most anticipated game of 2023, and it did not disappoint. And genuinely, there is not enough praise I can say for this game. It is amazing and deserves so much more love and attention than it has. Now, admittedly, its story is okay. It's not amazing, and in fact, I think it actively holds the game back, since the game's focus on having a story that itself is okay forced the game into being drastically more linear than its predecessor, which admittedly is a massive flaw and easily the thing that irks me with the game the most. It is incredibly disappointing to go from a game that is so open that you can do almost anything immediately and is practically open world with the level of freedom you have, to a game that is constantly holding your hand and telling you where to go. And again, that is not necessarily a bad thing. It is just really hard to not hold it against the game when the game that came before it did so much right. And this is the only aspect I think it didn't improve upon. Genuinely, I adore Tevi, and I haven't even scratched the surface of things in this game, there is so much build variety and quality of life that it did add. Genuinely, it is insane how many options there are, and the game even has a built-in badge randomizer, which allows you to have different items in different orders for subsequent playthroughs without locking key items that would prevent you from progressing. If I could make a proper video about this game, I would. But for now, I have to settle with including it in lists. And the same goes for the next game, and one of my favorite games of all time, Rabi Ribi. Okay, so imagine everything I just praised about Tevi without any of the flaws I just complained about, and amp the quality up to 11. Rabi Ribi is the predecessor I vaguely alluded to a few times in that section, and there's a very, very good reason. Genuinely, there is so much I want to say about this game, because I am probably never going to get an excuse to talk about this again, or at least till a certain game I will mention in a little bit releases. Which really sucks, because there's so much I could say about this game. It is one of my favorite games of all time. In fact, I'd say very confidently, it is my second favorite game of all time. And I have played close to 200 games, so that should say something. Earlier during Tevi's section, I mentioned that this game was so open that it could practically be considered open world, and I genuinely mean that. In my most recent playthrough, at the time of recording this, I really wanted to get all of the movement upgrades early. The air dash, the slide, all of that stuff. And I was able to do that before I fought a single required boss past the prologue, which is absolutely amazing. I love how open and free this game is. In all honesty, you could technically skip any combination of bosses. To beat the game, you are required to beat 10 bosses and then the final boss. But aside from the prologue and the final bosses, every other boss in the game is technically optional. So if there are ones you dislike, you don't have to fight them in future playthroughs, barring you want to go for the true final boss, which requires almost all of them, except for one of the only fights I personally dislike. There are close to 30 different, completely unique bosses in this game, and there's only one or two, depending on how you count it, that I have strong disdain for. And one mini-boss I dislike. Almost every other fight is amazing. And when I mean there are a ton of options in this game, I really mean it. From secret tech that lets you get to areas early, or I need to make this clear, I have wanted to make a challenge video on this game. But the problem is, I can't find any challenges that are feasible within my skill set that aren't already intended by the developers. This is a Metroidvania that you can beat by picking up 0 items. Your weapon is optional. The game rewards you for this. There are multiple achievements tied to beating the game without picking up any items. And again, I do mean any. Key items? Nope, you don't need those. Health upgrades? Absolutely not. Again, your literal weapon that you use to fight bosses, don't think about it. You don't need it. In fact, I highly encourage fans of the game who have not to try doing a 0% run, because it teaches you so much cool stuff about the ins and outs of this game. And all of this might have sounded like a weird tangent or off-topic thing. It is mostly me setting the stage for how much content is in this game, how open this game is, and just how the game will pretty much let you do whatever you want, and the developers accounted for that. And I know I already briefly mentioned this when I said that it had everything Tevi does, but the music, absolutely amazing. You're hearing it in the background right now. And the bosses are incredible. I think you could make an argument for which game has the better bosses, and I'd personally pick Rabi Ribi. Both are phenomenal, but overall, Rabi Ribi barely has any duds. Now, this is the part where I normally give the negatives, the complaints I have. I'll be entirely honest, this game is near perfect in my opinion. I have so little I could complain about. Genuinely, I wish there was more badge variety. That's about it. I have done more than a dozen playthroughs of this game, and it has never gotten old. And every single time, I learned something new and cool about the game. There are so few games that I adore as much as Rabi Ribi. So few that mean nearly as much to me. And it's a shame that it's a game that almost nobody talks about. Hollow Knight is the gateway drug to Metroidvanias. Rabi Ribi is my Hollow Knight. It is the reason I adore the genre. And to anyone who likes Metroidvanias, not even loves, just likes, I highly recommend both Tevi and especially Rabi Ribi. But, of course, those are just my thoughts. What are some indie games you adore and think more people should check out? Either way, I'll see you guys in the next one. Goodbye.